worked out here. We'll probably start at 3 after the hour, so 3 minutes after the hour. Got a great session today, so grab your caffeine beverage and we'll start here pretty soon. We're glad you're here. Some folks joining us, but welcome. I'm Doug Crandall, the project director at Advancing Employment. I'm joined today by Dr. Tracy Rackensberger, who's our resources and dissemination manager. There's Dr. Rackensberger. And by Joseph Harrison, a new hire to Advancing Employment, who's the Advancing Employment Program Coordinator. We're also joined by our friends from Georgia Tech, and Ben and Karen, I think, are going to enlighten us today. I'm going to let them introduce themselves and their work. This is number 13, I think, of webinars for Advancing Employment. For those of you who don't know, we are funded by the Georgia Council on Developmental Disabilities. Tracy, Dr. Rackensberger, will be doing a webinar next week at this time on teleworking, and then we'll have the rollout of our April webinars, which includes everything from visual resumes with Amy Price and Jillian Grable and Carl King, to the 3 fidelity scales that have been developed at Griffin Hamas. And Patty Casti and Dr. Steve Hall will be presenting on that. And our very own Katrina Spooner from the Macon Arc will be talking to us about customized employment and combining that with some meaningful day supports for folks. Okay, well, I am going to turn it over to Ben and Karen. Tracy will have a survey at the end. If you'll do us a solid and fill out that survey, she'll be posting that. We'll be monitoring chat and have some question and answer time as well. Welcome, Ben and Karen.
Thank you. My name is Karen Milchis, and I'm presenting today with Ben Satterfield, and we're going to be talking about an employer's guide to workplace accommodations for individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities. Ben is a research scientist with Georgia Tech, the Center for Inclusive Design and Innovation, and Georgia Tools for Life, and is an AT specialist. You may have also encountered him at UGA as an assistant professor with the Communication Sciences and Special Education Department in the College of Education. I should mention something about the Center for Inclusive Design and Innovation. I have a slide about that in a minute, but we are a merger of 2 different centers from a couple of years ago. Ben is formerly from AMAC, which is the Accessibility and Solutions Research Center. And I am from the Center for Assistive Technology and Environmental Access. We merged and created a new group with yet another acronym. So if you hadn't heard of the Center for Inclusive Design and Innovation in the past, that might be why. We've only been around for about 2 or 3 years now. I am a senior research engineer with CIDI, and I'm also the co-PI for Work Access, which is a project that we're going to be talking about in a few minutes. So our learning objectives today center around reasonable accommodation in the workplace. And we would like you at the end of this session to be able to give a definition for the term reasonable accommodation. I'll provide 2 examples. List 2 impacts of reasonable accommodation in the workplace, and also list 3 ways that assistive technology can support individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities in the workplace. Now, I should mention, well, actually, this was a slide I was thinking of earlier. At the Center for Inclusive Design and Innovation, we do have a number of different services in addition to research on workplace accommodations. We have a accessibility consulting service looking at both information and communication technology and user interfaces. We have a Braille printing operation. We provide captioning and described audio services, professional e-text, And then we have this certified assistive technology team that Ben is part of, which is Georgia Tools for Life, which is the Assistive Technology Act project for the state of Georgia. If you're not familiar with that, that is a project that provides information to people throughout the state about assistive technology. That can include funding, that might include letting people, ask questions. It might include having people borrow some equipment on occasion to try things out. So that's a resource that you definitely want to check out if you are not already familiar with them. And Tools for Life will be celebrating their 30th anniversary this year. So we're very excited about that. So before we get started talking about people with intellectual and developmental disabilities, I just wanted to take a step back for a moment and look at what the unemployment situation is for people in general, people with disabilities in general after COVID-19. There was an economic crisis brought about due to the pandemic, which impacted many people, but impacted people with disabilities even more. About 1 million people with disabilities lost their jobs, in the past year. When we look at the current unemployment rates, we're finding that it never was all that great for people with disabilities, but currently it's more than double that of people without disabilities at about almost 14%. When you look at people who have disabilities but are also Hispanic or Black, we're talking about unemployment rates around 16 or 17%. This is a problem and something that we're working to try to improve. In addition, there are many people with disabilities who are not in the workforce. Only 34% of people age 16 to 64 with disabilities are in the workforce, compared to about 76% without. So just about a third of the number. Well, half of the number. And although we have, there are many people who are not working, there's a great opportunity to improve that. For example, the U.S. Department of Labor has set a target for federal contractors to employ about 7% individuals with disabilities. So far, only 13% of employers have reached that target. So there's a lot of great deal more that employers can do. So one of the things that we wanted to do with this presentation, this was partly inspired by an article that Paula Morgan wrote for Forbes magazine back in December, An Employer's Guide to Implementing Disability Accommodations in 2021. And what she did is she wrote about what reasonable accommodations are, and sort of talked about what employers could do, sort of talked about why employers might want to hire people with disabilities. So we wanted to cover some of that today. So first of all, let's talk a little bit about what reasonable accommodation in the workplace is. This is a term that comes from Title I of the Americans with Disabilities Act, or the ADA. And the idea is that a reasonable accommodation is defined as providing assistance or making changes to a position or workplace to enable qualified employees to do and apply for their job despite having a disability. Now, there are a couple exceptions. One, if doing so would pose an undue hardship on the employer, or two, it poses a safety risk. We're going to be talking about each of those in a minute. And I should also mention that this applies to qualified employees. So we're talking about people who have all the requisite degrees, skills, and experience to perform the job's essential functions with or without accommodations. So it doesn't necessarily cover some of those extra things that the person only does, once or twice a year. But if it's something that really is critical to the job, the person needs to be able to perform it, though they might need additional accommodations in order to do so. So what are these accommodations? Well, being from Georgia Tech, we like the last bullet, assistive technology, whether it's low, medium, or high tech, different types of gadgets that might assist. But there are also a bunch of other options out there, including modified schedules, flexible hours, and remote work opportunities. These are things that were always done to some small extent, but in this past year under COVID, um, it's sort of exciting in a way because we've finally proved that um, these are options that actually do work. That you can give, allow people to work remotely and they will get the job done. It could also, accommodations could also include things like bringing in a job coach or work site modifications, particularly for people with more physical disabilities. Now, there are a few things that you do need to keep in mind when you are talking about reasonable accommodations. First of all, employers do not have to remove essential functions, create or lower production standards. It could create a new job or lower production standards as an accommodation. They can if they wish. So when we talk about job carving for someone, that's something that is very much allowed, but it is not required. So that's something to keep in mind. Um, I mentioned undue hardship a little earlier. Typically, people think of that as cost if an accommodation is going to cost too much for the business, but a business can also claim it if it would be unduly disruptive. So, um, asking to telework if the job involves a storefront where the person really needs to be there physically um, would be, would be considered, undue hardship. Slower work that impacts the work of others might also be a factor. So if the person is working on an assembly line, they do need to be able to keep up with the pace. So that is something to keep in mind. Um, on the other hand, it's also important to remember to accommodate all aspects of the job, including training, access to the break room, access to all the benefits of the job. And this is something that businesses often forget. They focus on the main essential functions and they forget some of those other things. This can get them into trouble. Um, so kind of foreshadowing your presentation, your next presentation, when you have people who are teleworking, you need to make sure that that training is accessible to them, any training that's being provided. We've also did a study recently looking at participation in the workplace, and interestingly, we found that having the person being able to use the break room, meeting rooms, the cafeteria, the same way as everyone else, really had a significant impact on the person's perception of their participation in the workplace. Their feeling that they were part of the team. So this is something that we don't want to overlook. Another thing to keep in mind, accommodations are not one size fits all. An accommodation for one employee with a particular disability may not fit another employee with the same diagnosis. This is something that's very important to remember because sometimes people will say, oh, well, we're going to hire people with Down syndrome. And they start assuming that because, Joe over there is using one particular accommodation, that Sally can use the same thing and it's going to work. That's not necessarily the case. You need to customize it to the individual person. And for this population that we're going to be talking about today, you particularly want to look at some of the different ways that people are communicating and some of the different ways that information is being shared. That may not apply the same way to every employee. Another thing to keep in mind, I've been talking about reasonable accommodations as part of Title I of the Americans with Disabilities Act. There is actually a Title III also about making businesses accessible to the public. But just doing that may not fit the Title I requirements for accommodating individual workers. Those guidelines were designed for kind of a generic average for people with disabilities. They also don't have very much information in there about people with cognitive disabilities. So you do want to look at the specific needs for the individual. And one example of that, I was interviewing a teacher who used a scooter, who was working on a very large campus, and she made a request to her principal to see if she could get a closer parking space to her classroom, which was in the back of the building, and had a very difficult time trying to explain to them that just because they had accessible parking at the front of the building, that didn't fit her particular needs. So that is something that you do need to keep in mind. Finally, I talked about safety in passing there. Employers can only use safety as an excuse if they can show that a specific employee has a safety problem, poses a risk to others or to themselves, not any employee with a particular condition. And this is something that you might run into where people might be concerned that a person with an intellectual or developmental disability or perhaps epilepsy might not be safe around particular equipment, but they can't base that solely on the person's condition, their diagnosis. They have to look specifically at how that person interacts with the environment. So if a person has epilepsy but hasn't been having any problems with seizures, it's not an issue. If it is, can it be accommodated? Before you rule that out as an option. So next, we wanted to talk a little bit about the cost and benefits of accommodations. And the majority of employers would probably be surprised to know that accommodations can be provided very inexpensively. The Job Accommodation Network, which is a organization out of West Virginia University. If you aren't familiar with them, you definitely want to look them up. Has been providing accommodation recommendations for a number of years. Have followed up with their folks, and have found that about 56% of accommodations cost absolutely nothing to implement. Quite often, this might be asking for a flexible schedule or an extra break period, or something that use of Post-it notes as reminders, something that really would not have much of a cost to implement at all. The rest of the accommodations cost on average under $500, and only about 6% result in annual costs. We've done some similar work in this area, found some similar numbers. And between Jan and our own work, in general, what we're finding is that offering reasonable accommodations turns out to be as beneficial for the employers as it is for individuals with disabilities. One of the reasons is that as we increase productivity and allow employees to work as effectively as possible, the productivity of the company also improves. So the company is benefiting from that. Some of the other benefits that we've found, and Jan has found, have included greater employee retention, improved productivity morale, lower workers' compensation and training costs, and improved company diversity. Probably about a decade ago now, we did a study with Syracuse University of some specific companies. We were interviewing many of their employees and supervisors. Some of the benefits that were cited in that study include improved employees' morale and job satisfaction. It made it possible for the employee to work here. Decreased employee stress at work, made it more likely that the employee will stay here, and improve productivity. What was interesting was that improved productivity was actually, that's the order of importance, I guess. Improved productivity actually came out as number 5. The bigger impact was the fact that employees were happy, they had less stress, they were staying, and therefore you had less turnover and less job training that needed to be provided. So I am going to shift over to Ben now, and he's going to be talking a little bit about what we know about individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities in the workplace. Ben?
Thank you, Karen. Good afternoon, everybody. Just want to share a few things that we've learned about people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. That's going to be the group we're going to focus on in terms of job accommodation for the rest of this particular talk. You know, the folks with intellectual disabilities have pretty much most of their needs and supports addressed while they're still in school up until age 22. But when that ends on their 22nd birthday, they really kind of get dumped out into the cold, cruel world. And the individual and their family then are pretty much on their own to try to figure out how they're going to navigate the world and enter into the workplace. And as a result, it's, as we know, jobs are just not plentiful for people with disabilities, and especially folks with intellectual and developmental disabilities. So there are many who are unemployed. They find themselves in situations where they have limited resources, and they typically are getting on a waiting list like we have here in the state of Georgia. I'm sure other states do something similar, to get their Medicaid waivers, which give them the funding that they can use to be able to get a day program or independent housing or the support that they need to be able to move forward with more independent living. And as far as work, that sometimes includes transportation. So in essence, until they can connect to the workplace or get some opportunity to broaden their horizons, they're essentially stuck at home. And the parents typically serve as sort of an unpaid caregiver. And often their level of inactivity just basically makes things even worse, can aggravate health challenges that they're already facing. And then on top of that, there's a sense of isolation that I think takes a toll on folks. So painting sort of a picture of where these individuals are coming from, I think helps us understand what we're going to need to deal with going forward. Okay, on our next slide. We talk about the employment of people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. As Karen was giving you statistics earlier, the statistics for people with disabilities in general are not very positive, but for people with intellectual disabilities, they're really low. I think the national number is something like 19% of those individuals are actually employed. I think in Georgia, we are a little bit below that. And only about 33% participation from this group, participation in the workforce in general. And the vast majority of those individuals are not working full-time, they're working part-time, and many of them just a few hours a week. So it's rare for an individual with developmental disabilities to be able to work full-time. And so the majority of these, in fact, the overwhelming majority of these folks are living below the poverty line. So that adds to the difficulty that they're facing. So looking further, I think one of the things that we find about individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities is that they make pretty darn good workers. And there is research that indicates, as Karen was pointing out, but it's even more true in that there's a lot of support for businesses that will hire individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities. I had the opportunity to work for a couple of decades in a company that manufactured items in the assistive technology field. And one of the things that we did was to hire individuals with developmental disabilities. And we found that those workers were some of the most loyal. They certainly loved their jobs that they had. I think one of the things that really clicked for them was that the job involved a routine with specific expectations, kind of repetitive work. So in that case, it was really well suited. With practice and repetition and some feedback and coaching, they became very skilled at doing what we were asking them to do. And when there were situations where an individual had a tough time with one particular aspect of the assembly line or the work that they were doing, we built a support or a jig or something that would help frame that work so that they could do it in the context of some support that was more fixed or more supportive. And the result was that it helped them to be more successful on a regular basis, and they could keep up with the job that they were asked to do. And one of the things that came out of this was, our employees, we had a bunch of them who could certainly have done the work that we asked this group to come in and do. But these guys did it, and they did it well, and that freed up the other employees to do other things. So there's a benefit to the company as a whole, not just to, it's not just something we're doing for these individuals. There's a benefit to the whole company in terms of our total productivity. So I think that's something else to keep in mind about this whole process. Okay, so in terms of obstacles to employment, there's some that we need to point out, but in general, there are going to be some social conditions that get in the way. Things like the lower expectations of some of these individuals. I think it's unfortunate, but frequently the case that we don't expect very much. And so often we're not giving them jobs that are very challenging or giving them opportunities to show what they really can do. So I think that's a real difficulty. And then there's a lack of services to support employment for them. And I think transportation is one of the big ones that we'll see come up over and over again. In the interest of full disclosure, I have a son with Down syndrome, and he's at that age where he's ready to re-enter the workforce after our COVID-19 experiences. And transportation is one of the big gotchas in terms of where he can work. So we have to sort of connect somehow with what else is going on for him to be able to get to work. But there's also physical barriers in the environment. And we need to sort of identify those relative to the individual and certainly in general to people with intellectual disabilities and being able to get into the workplace. What we're finding, however, is that there's a growing body of research and a lot of experience now that's telling us that persons with intellectual and developmental disabilities can use assistive technology effectively. It's promoting independence, it's enhancing the quality of their performance, and it helps to reduce the amount of supervision or support or direct assistance that they need. It's really a cool development, and we're seeing more and more opportunities. And one of the challenges, though, is that you got to get the technology so that it's right for the individual. That's going to be a theme about what we're talking about today. And hence this project that we've been working on. It's called Work Access. And we've been developing a tool to help individuals and their employers come up with the right technology to be able to support them in the workplace. We've got a quick video here that I'd like you to look at. It's just a couple of minutes, but it gives you a quick overview of what the project is all about. Let's see if we can get it to go, Karen. We may need to drop out and launch it separately, then we'll come right back. While she's queuing this up, I'll just mention that if y'all have any questions as we're going along, please feel free to enter them into the chat area, and we'll try to field them as we can get to them as we go along. We'll certainly make some time at the end to deal with questions as well.
Sorry, I've lost my screen share, but oh wait, okay, moved to the bottom suddenly there. Okay. Are you seeing a screen?
Yes, we are.
Okay.
Faced with a workplace accommodation problem, would you like to be able to learn how others have solved it? Are you frustrated when you see a solution that an employer or employee made on their own that is not working well because it was chosen without adequate information? Our research suggests that about 3/4 of employees with disabilities can't perform all of their job duties without accommodations. Unfortunately, not all employees have the accommodations that they need. Some employers and employees simply don't know what's available.
We can't hear.
Employees with disabilities and employers make the most informed and evidence-based decisions to lead to success in the workplace. While we are developing the tools, both Work Access and the Assistive Software Knowledge Base will be available for free in exchange for feedback on how to improve them. You can find more information about the tools on our website. If you would like to help in the development of these two accommodation tools, phone us at 404-894-2000 or email workaccess@design.godtech.edu. We would like to thank the National Institute on Disability, Independent Living, and Rehabilitation Research for funding this work.
Was the audio problem throughout or just at the very beginning?
We just had a problem in the middle.
In the middle.
What I was thinking, Karen, was if you could post the link to that, I believe we've got that.
Certainly.
Invest $1,000 right now.
Well, now I'm curious, but
So we'll put the link in the chat, and so you can go back and review that. But just generally speaking, we're looking to try to come up with a tool that is going to be available to employers and employees that will help them make decisions and make wise choices about the technology that is available to them through. We have a knowledge base as well as a link, an app or a website basically that will have this information available. Let me get set up just a second here. Karen, did you want to say anything more about the project itself while we're transitioning here?
sure. As you may have heard in the video or not, we are developing this tool which people can use to figure out what types of accommodations would work best for a particular individual. We ask information about the person, the task, the environment, but also ask about other factors that might impact whether one solution fits better than another. Things about, the other types of support that are available in the situation, whether it's a shared workstation, things like that. We provide a kind of a range of solutions. One of the things that's kind of interesting about this project is we are also going to be taking feedback from people who use the system and use it to improve our recommendations. So that's something that we're looking forward to. So anyway, I will let Ben get back to what he was talking about.
Okay. Thank you, Karen. Appreciate it. So let's move on to looking at individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities. So we're looking at a set of functional limitations, as you might describe here on the screen. But this covers a lot of different individuals. So some of who we're talking about, or some of the solutions we're talking about, will be ideally suited for people who have intellectual or cognitive or developmental disabilities issues. But some of the solutions are going to work for other people as well. And sometimes, if you haven't noticed it, in terms of assistive technology, a lot of things that have been developed for individuals with disabilities have turned out to become so helpful and productive. I mean, like curb cuts and doors that open automatically, and situations like word prediction on your word completion on your cell phone. Things like that have come out of supporting people with disabilities, but they have been a blessing to everybody. So this notion of universal design, you may find that some of the solutions that we're going to talk about would be helpful more broadly in your business or in a work situation than just for one or two individuals. So just keep that in mind as we're looking through this. Now, on our next slide, we'll give you a sort of a drill down of where we're going to be looking today. We have developed decision trees in each of about 9 or 10 different areas. And again, this is across all disabilities and all situations, and mostly in typical office work, but we've broadened it into other employment areas as well. So we may find that several of these areas would be really appropriate to go into today, but because we only have a little bit of time, we're going to focus on the issues relating to staying on task and learning and remembering specific work procedures and tasks. But we might expand this talk about individuals with intellectual disabilities, and we could talk about other things, like planning the workday or the communication issues relative to face-to-face or in remote situations. So today we're going to talk about learning and remembering the specific tasks and staying on task. So let's move forward. I think we can probably skip on down to the next one. Yeah. So we're going to be looking at 3 problems under this learning and remembering the performance of specific tasks and procedures. Remembering steps in a task, remembering specific information needed to complete the task, and accessing on-the-job training. So as we look at the solutions, one of the things that's going to pop out really fast is the value of doing a task analysis. It's a simple idea, but I think it's something we often overlook, certainly in education, but I think it's also true in the workplace. Many assigned tasks really are multiple tasks kind of clustered together. And it's not always apparent to the employee with an intellectual disability what's involved or where to start or how to break it down. So if we do a task analysis on what we're asking an individual to do, we can break the steps down and detail each one of the steps so that it's less overwhelming, but there's also going to be a better result because they'll understand exactly what's expected at every step along the way. And we can do this in multiple ways. As you can see on the screen here, we've got several different ways of addressing this. We could use paper and pencil, just providing a text-based list of the steps involved in a task. We could use electronic means or a technology, a list that is on a note minder, for instance. There's also a thing called video modeling that's very widely used in terms of helping individuals, particularly those on the autism spectrum, in terms of learning tasks and conforming behavior to appropriate norms, things like that. But there's a tool that I wanted to just throw out to you. It's an iPad app that's very inexpensive. It's called WordTube, T-O-O-B. And it's a great way to be able to create a video on the fly of a particular task that you're trying, or a skill that you're trying to illustrate. But having something that the individual could go back and replay, and it's concrete because it's a visual image of an individual, seems to work well, research says, if it's the individual, but it still works if you just show any individual. But the idea is that they'll have an opportunity to see the task carried out, and that's a real positive aspect of video modeling. And I just thought I'd throw out WordTube, excuse me, as I think it's $19, but it's an iPad app, and since the camera is built into the iPad, it's a great opportunity to be able to take an image and present that image right away in real time to the individual going forward. But we also want to make sure that we're presenting the instructions that we're giving the individual in a format that's going to work for them. And so if we have a person with a visual impairment, we might want large print, or someone who's blind and is a Braille reader, we want to put the materials available to them in a format that they're going to understand. So I think one of the things to keep in mind is it's probably, it's really important that the solution we come up with works for the individual, but it also would be useful and perhaps best practice to engage the individual in the development of whatever system we're going to develop. To the degree they can participate and give you feedback on what's working, then I think we're going to see that the result is going to be superior, and the individual is going to be in a better position to do the task that's being asked of them. Okay. So some other examples, it doesn't have to cost a lot of money. Sometimes we can use flip charts and cards that have visual representations of the task being asked. For instance, if you're putting address labels on a document or on an envelope or something like that, you may want to have some very specific guidance in terms of where that label is supposed to be placed so that it's not haphazard. Or I'll tell you an example of one. My son Blake, when he was in community supported work, he was still in high school. He was sent to a local grocery store, and he was asked by the, and he seemed to be well received there. He was able to do all the tasks that they asked him, until one day when they asked him to go through the banana display where all the bananas were piled up and to get rid of all the bad bananas and then replace them with the good bananas. So the manager of that particular day brought out this wheelbarrow full of fresh bananas, and he said, "Now get rid of the old ones, throw them in this box, and put the new ones out there." And when he came back, all the bananas were still in the pile. The good ones were stacked on top of the bad ones. And it was like, "Blake, why didn't you get rid of the bad bananas?" And Blake said, I did, and this was unusual because Blake normally is very compliant and supportive, and he does what he's asked to do. But in this case, he was adamant that I did what you asked me to do. Well, when they called us on the phone and said, "Well, something's up with Blake here today. What's going on?" And when they told us what they asked him to do, we said, "Well, did you show him a picture of what a bad banana looks like?" We make a lot of banana bread here at our house, and I'm not sure he's ever seen a bad banana. So, the reality here is that we need to be able to give individual the information that they need for the context that we're providing them. And sometimes the more specific we can provide in terms of images and support, the better. And clearly, sometimes just saying it, it doesn't get the point across in quite the way we have in mind the task being communicated. So we might use a combination. We can put some text along with it. We might also use a talking photo album, for instance, and we can record verbally instructions to accompany pictures that we've taken and provide instructions that way. So a couple of thoughts there. So for some individuals who are going to need greater communication support, we might even consider using a voice output communication aid so that we could facilitate communication in a two-way setting. We might also look at providing support that is dynamic in all three of these ways, where we'll have an image, we'll have auditory support with limited text that an individual could sort of flip through the steps one after the other. A good example of this is a product called Visual Impact. And it's made by the AbleLink company. And basically it allows the employer or the job coach or whoever to take pictures of the workplace and stages of the work in succession as an individual would work through it. So we have an image that they can look at and say, this is what we're going to do, and this is how we're going to do it. We have some auditory support that explains it. And then we have a little bit of text for those who can manage that. And we might also support with haptic or auditory cues and prompts to be able to prompt the individual for the next step in the task. Okay. So another approach might be to provide cheat sheets, reminders. We can put a bulletin board with Post-it notes on it to be able to make a low-tech solution, or we could do something like the app called Padlet, P-A-D-L-E-T, which is basically electronic Post-it notes that are just up on a screen. So the individual might have a tablet with them, an iPad or an Android tablet, but it would have the instructions in much the same way that you would have the Post-it notes, except that now it's on a screen and electronically they can carry it around. But putting together prompts and reminders, or maybe putting together a repository where information that the individual would need to go to if they had a question might reside, are all ways that we can help the individual figure out how to carry out the job the way we want them to do it. So, I mean, whether it's electronic and it's recorded sound, or whether it's just text printed or in electronic form, we can have those supports available. And again, the best practice says that we need to engage the individual in the development of this system so that they take ownership of it. And we've got their input in terms of getting the best possible solution so that it really works for them. Okay. Another problem that is an issue sometimes is the accessing on-the-job training. For some individuals, just explaining, like I was saying in terms of my son Blake, just telling him to change the bananas out isn't enough. You know, we need to get more detail. And so there may be a need for, or in terms of accessing the training materials that you're providing all of your employees, we need to look at how that's going to come across, both in terms of visual and auditory supports that might be needed. So we might put captions and make those available, or at least provide a transcript for the individual as they go through the training module. We might also provide some description, maybe auditory description of some of the important visuals if the individual doesn't recognize what that is, or because of a visual challenge isn't able to identify it. I think also, well, this is great, good transition here. Sometimes it's just not going to fit, you know, the job that we have in mind for the individual because of the accommodations we're going to provide, or because of some of the materials that they'll be using, or the way we've structured the work. It's really not going to follow the standard training material. So you need to develop some one-on-one training. And sometimes this works even better because it's more hands-on, and the individual has a chance to have it modeled and then try it and get feedback, and then get the repeated practice with supervision, which I think research also indicates is a superior way to master a skill or a task. So having this kind of one-on-one may be a good solution to consider. And you may find that more than just the individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities profit from this kind of training. And it's also a great way for someone who's learning a task, you know, to learn it and to master it is to train someone else in how to do it. So just some thoughts on ways to make accessing the on-the-job training make that more accessible. Okay, so we're going to take another task on here and look at the challenges with staying on task. There's some employees with intellectual and developmental disabilities struggle to stay focused at times. In fact, they're not the only ones. Sometimes the workplace can be very distracting. But let's look at some solutions and some approaches here that might be useful. One approach might be to provide a checklist, a set of assigned tasks, and have the individual take them one step at a time and check them off as they work through the assignment for the day, or this particular task. So they basically have a worksheet, and they just check it off as they're working along. We can do that on an app that they can carry around in a pocket, or a pocket cell phone, or an iPad, or an Android tablet, or we can just have it on a clipboard, or something that they can just carry around with them. But there's also a technique where we can put together a digital checkoff list that both a coworker or the supervisor and the individual both have access to. So, and I've made a list of several of them here for you. This is a pretty nifty tool to be able to set the workplace up and have the checklist available. And now I can check in on John remotely. If John's working in the warehouse and carrying out a particular set of tasks, I can see which ones he's checked off, and I can see how he's coming along, or I can see, oh, he skipped step number 2. I need to go back and check on how he's doing. So several of these particular technologies are Trello. And by the way, each of these companies, their URL is just their name and .com. So it's Trello.com, TickTick.com, SquidHub.com, Toodledoo.com, and ZenKit.com. So these each provide an opportunity for some collaborative work through a digital space. And it's a great way for the individual to be connected to other workers, and the worker and the supervisor in particular to sort of keep an eye without being too intrusive. Now, we have some challenges with individuals who have difficulty remaining focused, but it's not following the instructions. It's just that there's pent-up energy, excess energy. Some individuals with ADHD also demonstrate these characteristics. So what we need to do is to find ways to channel that energy off in a constructive manner. Sometimes it's as simple as giving them a squeeze toy or a squeeze ball, for instance, or some kind of a handheld fidget that allows them to do something that just burns off that nervous energy. And it's interesting, but as you watch these individuals, often it's not any kind of a distraction. They're able to stay focused. It's more distracting if they can't burn the energy off. So we might also provide an alternative form of seating as a different kind of a chair for a period of time. Let them go sit on a ball chair, for instance. For some individuals, just changing their posture makes a big difference. So being able to stand up for a while and work, and then go back to sitting down. So having a workplace that adjusts, having a work table or a workstation that is adjustable might fill the bill. Sometimes I've seen putting an exercycle underneath the workstation for an individual and letting them pedal while they're working is a great way to get them engaged and get that energy burned off. Also keeps them fit and healthy too. Sometimes I feel like I need to put one under my desk. Okay, so we might also think just in terms of changing out the work, not work on the same task all day long. I think we've all been in situations where the job just goes on and on and on and on. It's the same thing. And sometimes, you know, the quality of our output diminishes the longer we stay on the same task. So sometimes for some of these individuals, just changing it up and doing something a little differently makes a big difference. Or we might do something on the order of a short break, maybe a 2 or 3 minute break that's strategically placed at different times through the workday that gives them a chance to have a little change of venue, come back to the workplace and get back on the task. And it helps if there's some reminders to do that. So this is a great way to use some of those digital tools we talked about earlier that can be set to give a prompt or a reminder, hey, it's time to go take your break. And here's another prompt to bring you back so that we don't waste you know, any precious work time and we get back to work on time. Okay, so maybe this is a good time. We have a couple more things that we want to say before everybody heads off, but I just wanted to give a second to see if there are any questions that we need to address before we get too far along.
Yeah, Ben, it's Doug. I think, Grace, it looks like you got your questions answered, which is perfect. And I think we've covered some other ones. I will say in email, and it may just be too long, so I went ahead and posted the Jan site on job coaches as reasonable accommodations. But if there's anything you want to say about that's a question. Is a job coach a reasonable accommodation?
Well, I think we pointed out in an earlier slide that clearly was, and
Yeah.
Karen, you might want to speak to this, but I think some of the suggestions we've carried out, you know, you sort of need to model for the employee with an intellectual or developmental disabilities, at least initially, how things are going to be, what the expectations are and how the job needs to be done. So I think the job coach is a key element to the success of even some of these strategies, but yes.
Yes, job coaches definitely can be counted as reasonable accommodations. Personal care attendants, not really, because that's not a work-related thing. That's dealing more with personal needs. But yes, that's one of the approach.
You're getting lots of love in the chat here. Tracy will be in contact. I assume it's okay, Karen and Ben, to send out the PowerPoint.
Yes.
Yes, please. And there were a couple links I was supposed to put into the chat, and I wasn't able to do that while displaying the slides. So I will go send those off for her to also include in the email.
Just wanted to mention too, so many of the folks I think on the webinars have been, participating in the customized employment training around negotiating with employers, and so many of those tips and ideas that you all have presented can be incorporated to that upfront negotiation, and that's just good sound practice. Fabulous information. So we're getting all kinds of great feedback here. We're coming up on it. We will send out the PowerPoint. If you don't mind, you all, Tracy's had to jump off. Dr. Rackensberger is going to be with us next week, as I said at this time, to really give up some of her research around teleworking, but also her lived experience. You're not going to want to miss that one. Grant Jerkins has asked a question. Maybe we'll end it on this one from GVRA. Which of the digital checkoff lists do you like the best? Free is a plus. Any answer there?
At this point, I don't think any of them are free. I think the Trello is the one that I've looked at the most, but I just looking over the way the others appear to be presented, I think they're all pretty much doing the same thing.
Yeah, this is Grant. I'm just going to jump in really quick. So cost is a big issue. A lot of times, even low cost stuff can be a big issue sometimes. There's this app called Our Groceries that was recently brought to my attention. So it's for families to use. They create shopping lists, right? So if dad is out at Walmart and he picks up the paper towels, he checks that off. Everybody sees that he's checked that off the list. So you can take that list and make it tasks, right? So the supervisor can put all the tasks that he needs the person, and he can see as the person checks off what the person has done, what they have not done. If 20 minutes have gone by and there's been no forward movement, maybe it's time to give them a call, see what's going on. So it's a really awesome free app.
Thank you for sharing that. That's a great idea.
Cool.
Yeah, no problem.
Way to appropriate technology for another purpose. That's great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Very cool.
Yeah, I love it. Well, finally, Karen and Ben, I think we had a couple questions about the video. I know we've posted that link. Are there things that this group can help with related to the research or any of the other work that you're doing?
I'm so glad you asked that.
Thank you for the lovely segue there. So the information that Ben was presenting today came from some focus groups that we ran. We're going to be doing additional focus groups on other topics, but before we get to that point, we also want to follow up on some of the things that were discussed today and some of the other things on our lists. Make sure that it's ready to be inserted into our work access system. So we have some surveys that we're putting together where you get to go through, critique what we have, tell us if it's relevant, tell us if it's clearly worded. Participants will be entered into a drawing for a $50 Amazon gift card. And please do not check that link today. I have to debug something still. It will be active starting tomorrow. I mean,
Karen,
if you know that link, but we don't, but it's not active quite yet. The other
Karen,
thing,
if you can make sure Tracy has that link when she sends out the PowerPoint tomorrow, she can send the link as well.
I will do that. Thank you. And another thing, just to again foreshadowing your next session, we've also put together some COVID-19 resources for this project, looking at teleworking and accommodations for returning to work with safety measures. So I have a link here with some other resources that you can check out, including a review that we did looking at different teleworking software platforms and what accessibility features were in each one. So if that's something that you want to find out which one has the best captioning capabilities, that's something that you might want to check out. So,
Well, as we often do with this wonderful, wonderful group, we want to use your reaction button or unmute to give our wonderful presenters a round of applause. Thank you. Thank you. Use your reaction buttons. There you go. You're starting to get the love there. We really thank you, Lynn. We really appreciate it, you all. And thank you for your emails there. As always, I will stay on a little while as the host and say goodbye. Thank you, Ben. Thank you, Karen, very, very much.
thank you.
Our pleasure.
We also, just so we know, I think we had somebody on, Michael, from the Arizona DD Council. Anybody else from out of state? As we're getting unmute, let us know. Anybody else? All right. You won't want to miss April's sessions as well. I don't know if I mentioned that we'll have the Rhode Island Self-Employment Project back on with 2 moms who have really supported their adult children's self-employment. So you're going to want to make sure you sign up for those. Advancingemployment.com is where you can stay connected with us. Cheers from Beirut. I love it, Grace. Very cool. You win. You win.
Farthest,
Sorry, Michael. Arizona is not going to cut it.
farthest commute.
Advancingemployment.com. You can sign up for Tracy's newsletters, announcements from Joseph on these webinars and other COPs that we're doing with GVRA. So you can't mess up if you hit advancingemployment.com. Thank you, Pam Hunter Dempsey. Yeah, next time, Michael, maybe next time you'll be the only one on that far. So thank you all. I'm going to go ahead and end the session. Thank you both very, very much. Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye-bye. Y'all have a good day.
Goodbye.